Hey, good morning to you. You're inside of the Africa Forum. It is Running Africa, and thank you so much for joining us. On the 107s, 107.1, all the way to 107.9. Thank you for joining us on the internet at iriefm.net. Thank you, Madase. All right, so we're going to be going to the phone lines to speak with Dr. Taniesha Burke. As we told you, she's a mother. She's a certified positive discipline parent educator, cross-cultural psychology research and child development lecturer. Dr. Burke received a BSc in psychology and an MSc in applied psychology from Irie, and she studied in Canada, University of Guelph. She has a doctoral degree in family relations and human development from the University of Guelph in Canada. She has worked with youths and their families in Jamaica. She's worked with youths and their families in Canada and in Germany through her courses, her workshops, her mentorship and coaching programs. She's passionate about working with families, especially those who struggle with acculturating to the culture of their immigrating country and ethnic minorities. Dr. Burke's research focuses on child development and parent-child relationships. Her research objective is to promote the strength and resilience of the family. Everywhere you go. So we're standing by to go to the phone lines to talk to Dr. Burke about positive discipline. We go to the phone lines to Dr. Taniesha Burke. Dr. Taniesha Burke, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Good morning.
On your program.
You're most welcome. This is my sister, my friend. All right. So just so listeners know, you are my sister. And we're talking about not necessarily blood sister, but our families have known each other for a very, very long time. And I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation with you this morning, considering the work that you've put in, the studies you've put in, and the practice that you have and continue to put in to make our families better. How did you come to be in this field? Because you could have gone in many directions, but you're concentrating on the family and so on.
Yes, well, I have always had an interest in understanding human behavior, and that is why I did my undergraduate and graduate work in psychology. Mm-hmm. But while I was doing my master's, I was trying to decide what I should do as it relates to specializing in the doctoral program. Mm-hmm. And during that time, I became pregnant. Mm-hmm. So I had my son at the end of my master's degree program. And it's through having him then I realized, yes, I've had all this knowledge about child development, and I wanted to learn more as it relates to parent-child relationships so that I can improve my skill as a parent. Mm-hmm. And that just branched out into learning parent-child relationship across cultures, and now I'm in the process of imparting that knowledge to parents around the world. Mm-hmm. So it's really been inspired by my son. So I had a general idea that I wanted to do psychology, but when I got pregnant, I was like, okay, child development, parent-child relationship.
What a brilliant way to go, though. Congratulations on that and the work that you've been doing. Our listeners, I'll tell them where they can find out much more information about you and your work in a little while. Right now, though, you are talking to us from Europe. Where in Europe are you?
I'm actually in Berlin, Germany.
Okay. Well, you sound as if you're in the next room, so we're happy for that. Loud and clear. So let's talk a little bit about what I want to first of all foreground some of the challenges that we're facing here in Jamaica, not just in the family but nationwide. And I think obviously some of those most if not all are coming as a result of family relations and parenting and so on. So if you could help us to understand how some of the challenges we face within our society feed back to parenting. So let's identify some of those challenges first. We have high crime rate. We have, we were talking about some of those behavioral issues this morning in terms of conflict resolutions and so on. How do some of these feed back to parenting?
Well, for the first thing I would like to highlight is that a highly stressed environment will impact the parent-child relationship, which in turn impacts the development of the child's brain. So the environment shapes the brain of the child, and in shaping the child's brain, there are certain behavioral outcomes, whether good or bad, that can come about. So because of the economic challenges, the high crime rate, and so on, Jamaica is a highly stressed environment. And that level of toxic stress is then imparted on the parent. The parent is not able to show up in the form of having nurturing attachment with their child, and that leads the child not having the necessary attachment experiences that are needed for them to have appropriate or positive developmental outcome. So that's one of the main challenges, is dealing with the stress of the environment. So that, yes, a lot of parents, we're doing the best we can with our circumstances, but sometimes those circumstances can be so overwhelming that we're not able to show up for our children the best way that we're supposed to show up for them.
And what does showing up for our children look like?
First of all human beings, let's go back to infancy. So a human being is basically born helpless. They can't, unlike other species, immediately take care of themselves. And so we have this innate need for a sense of belonging and a sense of connection and attachment. So what happens with an infant is that from birth, they need to be attached to the primary caregiver. And in our society, that usually is the mother. When a child does not have the appropriate experience or the frequency of attachment that is needed for healthy development, they can experience what is called insecure attachment, meaning they go through life not trusting their environment, not trusting the people in their environment. Even when they're in relationships, for example, as adults, they bring in this level of insecurity that prevents them from really experiencing the relationship fully and wholly. They're always thinking there's something that's going to happen that's going to be negative and cause the end of the relationship. They might even go through avoidance attachment, where they just become very numb and detached from their peers, from family members, and also from the primary caregiver. So what happens is that when children don't have the necessary attachment with parents, because we have this innate need for connection, children often fill that void elsewhere. And one of the best ways for them to fill that void is with peers. So what happens is that the peers become the template of who they are supposed to be, how they're supposed to act, their value systems, and so on. And what happens is that two different forms of attachment cannot compete with each other. The human being, which is a child, will have to choose. Now, if the attachment to the peers is stronger than the attachment to the parents, children are more likely to go with the values and attitudes of their friends compared to their parents. And that is where we see a lot of conflict. So parents are saying children aren't listening, they're engaging in inappropriate behavior, whether it's sexual, drugs, or just general behavioral issues. And that is because at the important point of infancy and early childhood, the early childhood years of development is so critical. If you do not have the ability to nurture your child and develop healthy attachment with your child at that time, you end up having that the child will find that form of nurturing elsewhere, which may go counter to what you have as your value system as the parent and the family as a whole. So that are some of the issues that can come about when we're too busy, or for a lot of us as parents, the priority is now having the material things, having the financial requirements, whatever it is, instead of spending those early childhood years, those first 7 years in particular, nurturing and connecting and bonding with our children. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen. They go elsewhere because every human being needs to have a sense of belonging and connection.
And I noticed you talk about the first 7 years. Are there different stages within that 7 years when that parent-child bonding, that parent-child relationship should be looking different, feeling different things happening in terms of that attachment that is necessary?
Well, in the 7 years, it's more of a parent managing a child. So you're making sure that they keep out of danger. You're bonding with them, meaning spending adequate quality time. So it's not just giving your children material things, but bonding with them, getting into their world. What is it that they like? Having conversations with them, not lecturing them and using punitive punishment to get them to do what you want, but nurturing their brain, especially when you think about executive functions, teaching them how to regulate their emotions, how to regulate their behavior, teaching them how to develop empathy and morality and those kind of things. That's what is happening in the early years. Because when you look at the human brain has different parts, and you have, for example, the primitive side of the brain, which is like at the brain stem, and that is related to, that controls your heart rate, your breathing, those automatic functions that you don't really think about. Then you have like the amygdala that controls fight or flight in case you're in danger. And then when you go up, you have the prefrontal cortex, which is at the front of the brain, that deals with all executive functions. So how you make decisions, how you regulate your behavior, empathy, and so on. That part of the brain takes a while to develop. It actually completes at age 25. But during, especially the early childhood period, it is important for parents to spend time nurturing their children and teaching them how to develop, for example, regulations on their behavior, impulsivity, their emotions, and so on, so that they can better able to interact with the wider society. That's something that just doesn't happen by itself. So it's the way you interact, and that's where parenting comes in, because the way you discipline your children influence whether or not those outcomes relating to the prefrontal cortex is going to be successful.
All right.
If you're one that uses punitive punishment, you are actually numbing down or delaying the development of that part of the brain.
All right. We want to pick up. Go finish your statement. Yeah, go ahead and finish that statement. That's why.
So that's why in early childhood, it's really important for parents to develop a nurturing relationship with children, one that is teaching and guiding instead of one that is very punitive and difficult for the child.
All right.
And then as they get to adolescence, it's changed from more of a manager to more of a coach, because now you have to, in a way, communicate different with teenagers compared to how you communicate with a child in middle and early childhood.
Talking about positive discipline in homes, especially we're looking specifically at Jamaica this morning. We want to welcome you on the internet from across the world. I know that a lot of this will relate to you. We have our own particular challenges on the ground here, but Caribbean-wide, I think that our households are looking very similar. So, Dr. Burke, let's talk then about discipline and the different kinds of discipline. And you are particularly aware of discipline in Jamaica historically and otherwise. Help us to understand a little bit about when we talk about disciplining a child, what does that mean? And how does that currently work in Jamaica?
Yes, so discipline in Jamaica is historically grounded in our history relating to slavery. That back then was more adaptive, but because of the extraordinary circumstances of the slavery environment. But now a lot of those discipline practices still survive until this day. And they're now very maladaptive and have negative impact on children. So some of those, for example, are the spanking, some people say spanking, hitting, corporal punishment, threats, even withdrawal of privileges, shaming. All of those, when you look at it cross-culturally and within Jamaica, have negative impact as it relates to children's self-esteem. It's also associated with suicide ideation, depression, delinquent behavior, and other form of negative behavioral outcomes. Now, there are different types of discipline strategies that parents use. So you have the punitive, which the literature shows is prevalent among all socioeconomic classes in Jamaica, but more so in the lower classes. So you have the punitive discipline, and then on the other extreme end, you have permissive discipline. And permissive discipline is where you basically allow the child to do whatever they want. They make decisions without any form of thought relating to consequences. The world revolves around me. Everybody's supposed to make me happy. Now, even children who grow up with permissive discipline and without boundaries, they also are at risk for having depressive symptoms and other forms of other behavioral outcomes, negative outcomes. Now, the other one is where positive discipline comes in, and that is more of the authoritative parenting, where there is kindness, where you respect the child, you respect the child's autonomy, but you're also very firm. So you're not going to the extreme of the shaming, the hitting, but you're setting clear boundaries and logical or natural consequences for behavior. And within that, you're also teaching your children life skills that are necessary to take them forward in life. So those are when you look at the spectrum, you have the punitive on one end, the permissive on the other end, and in the middle you have the positive discipline or the authoritative discipline that takes in more of discipline that has several criteria. So when you look at it, the discipline is kind and firm, which means it's respectful and encouraging to the child. It also helps the child to have a sense of belonging and significance, so it creates connectivity. And in that interaction, the discipline strategies are effective long-term. So in the positive, you get a positive outcome, and it teaches the children valuable social life skills, such as having good character. And it also helps children to discover that they're capable of becoming whoever they want to be, and they have the power to make healthy, constructive decisions.
All right.
Now, when we are punitive, we are kind of not allowing our children to develop a sense of capability, connection, and so on. But we can go into details with that.
I want to, before we get to positive discipline, because we here in Jamaica, as you point out, even though there have been a lot of discussion in the various spaces in the public sphere about punitive discipline, about beating and shaming, you talked about that, and the kind of just embarrassing your children, hurting literally. So this is what happens, and then you hear the conversation about, well, my parents beat me and see me come out good, and I mean not do me, and so this is something that is repeated. Also, we find that in the classrooms, that even though the Ministry of Education has now said that corporal punishment should not happen in the classrooms anymore, that it's still happening, because you're talking about members of a society who are teachers, who find themselves in spaces where this is what they do, this is what they know. But you've pointed out that this hurts a child and therefore impacts on the relationships that child is now going to have at various different phases of development. So let us talk about that a little bit more in terms of how punitive discipline impact and affect a child, and then through that child's different stages of development into adulthood, impacting our nation.
Yeah, so it's interesting that we always have this fallacy that I was hit and nothing happened to me. And usually people say nothing happens, negative happened to me, because they're not externalizing their experiences, meaning they're not going out and hitting others and being violent to others. But sometimes what I do is bring parents to understand, again, what's happening in the brain, and how, yes, you might not be externalizing your experiences, but there are certain things. So, for example, when children experience punitive discipline, they're not being taught. They're actually being punished. They're not taught how to regulate their emotions. How many adults who were physically beaten, when they're going through highly stressed moments, are able to control their emotions, regulate it effectively? How How are their decision-making skills? Now, as it relates to children, I want parents to understand what's happening in your children's body when you're using punitive forms of discipline with them. And as I mentioned, you have the primitive brain, the brainstem, the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex executive function. Now, when you're doing punitive punishment, you're not engaged in the prefrontal cortex, which deals with all the life skills that we need to develop. What is happening is that when a child is experiencing punitive punishment, what happens is that the amygdala, which is a fight or flight, so it's like a little almond, it's shaped like a little almond in our brain, that literally sets off. And through evolution, we needed that so that we can know if a bear is coming, we need to run, we need to fight, or we need to do something to survive. When that is activated, what happens is that cortisol, which is a stress hormone, is released in high quantities in the body of our children. And when a child experiences the cortisol flushing through their body, one of the best ways to eliminate that is to cry. What do parents do when they're disciplining their children punitively? What do they say? Stop your crying or give you something to cry for. When you see your child actually crying, it's the body trying to eliminate the stress hormones that is flooding the body. The second thing that also happens is that because you're in this fight or flight mode, your sympathetic nervous system is also impacted. So what happens is that your pupil gets dilated, your heart rate increases, and so on. Then you have the dopamine, the glutamate, all of that is flooding your children's body. And when that happens, when the dopamine gets too high in your child's body, there's an inability to focus. There is absence of learning. For example, when they have high glutamate levels in their body as well, they tend to be very aggressive. And that's what you see in boys. They will tend to fight back. But for the girls, they tend to internalize, and that will help contribute to them experiencing shame and low self-esteem. Another important thing is that the hippocampus, which you can describe as like the Google of the brain. So it's like the search engine of the brain that's responsible for processing memory. Oftentimes that shuts down as well. And sometimes parents will say, why did you do a particular thing? What do children usually say? I don't know. Reason, they cannot get their hippocampus is shut down. So their memory processes has also become very faulty. Now, the prefrontal cortex, that what is impacted is, for example, the left hemisphere that is responsible for reason, cause and effect, chronological organization, verbal skills, and so on, learning and memory, that gets completely shut off. Our children are not learning in that particular moment. So I know the reason why parents want to be very punitive is that they feel if they don't do it, the child is going to lose control. The child is going to become this monster, or they're going to feel that they're losing control as the parent. But what is happening in that moment is that you are trying to discipline your child. It is so ineffective because all of what is happening in your child's brain, they're incapable of processing anything helpful. So what happens is that, for example, especially with the prefrontal cortex, when that shuts down, they're not learning how to process their emotions. They're not learning how to develop discipline, develop good decision-making skills. Good decision-making skills come about when parents ask, why did you decide to do that? What was your thought process? Why did you feel you needed to do that? When you get children to become very reflective of their behavior, they start to understand themselves why they started to behave in a particular way, and that will help them in the future to make different decisions. What happens with punitive is that we beat them and we immediately say they're not supposed to do it. So what you do, you stop the behavior. But in stopping the behavior, you're not teaching your children how to make appropriate decisions. You're not teaching them how to regulate their emotions. You're not teaching them how to regulate their behavior. And then this is carried on as they get older, and these children, unfortunately, become adults who are unable to regulate their emotions. who cannot make appropriate decisions that is wholesome for themselves. So they may have issues with even morality. You did not give them an opportunity to learn who they are as an individual, because all you did was stop on a behavior, but you weren't teaching them an alternative. So yes, you might not be hitting somebody, shooting somebody, and so on, but what is happening in your prefrontal cortex? Is it developed in a manner that should have been developed in a way that you can become more competent and more capable as a human being? And the interesting thing you mentioned with schools, data have shown that children in cultures where corporal punishment has been outlawed in all aspects of life, youth-on-youth violence actually decreased. And we might think we need to beat our children to get them to behave, but what we're doing is teaching them violence, and what we're doing is teaching them that the only way you can problem solve is through hitting others. And yes, some children, especially girls, may internalize it, and you think, okay, they're behaved in your eyes, but there are things going on with self-esteem issues. So how many of us struggle with self-esteem issues now, even as adults? How many of us are able to stand up for ourselves in all circumstances, in our intimate relationships, when we're in the work environment, when we're in church or whatever, when somebody is imposing autonomy and our belief system? How many of us can confidently stand up and speak up for ourselves in those moments? Many of us can't, because we were not, that part of our brain was not nurtured and trained when we were young. Instead, what happened is that our parents just immediately stop a behavior, but did not replace it with something else through teaching and guidance.
And you know, this is really, I'm listening to you and I'm like, wow. It's critical information, I think. Especially, we're looking at a nation where we're the second most violent country in the world. And I think we have to look at all elements of why. I mean, it's a complicated issue, but I think what happens in the home is critical to how we then begin to interact with each other, to how we negotiate our relationships and so on. Because you're telling me about what's happening in the brain, if the behavior stops, but you're not given an alternative as to how to make decisions and so on. What happens to that child in the classroom later on? What happens to that child as an adult in the workplace? And specifically, what happens to that child in a relationship? How then do you begin to negotiate man-woman relationships, family relationships? How are these impacted?
That is also a challenge. So there are three things that I need to highlight that results from punishment. When we punish our children, there are three R's that are more likely to come about. They're either going to become revengeful, so they're going to hurt somebody because they felt hurt. So they might hurt you, a sibling, or somebody else. They might become rebellious. So we see a lot of children acting out, especially once they enter the teenage years. They start to act out and go against everything that you want them to hold on to. The other thing is that they tend to retreat, and oftentimes parents see the retreat as good, but it's actually something toxic. So they retreat in the sense they start to self-loathe, and they start to think negatively of themselves. Some of them develop depressive symptoms. Some of them develop serious self-esteem issues. Now, when you look at man-woman relationships, the data has shown that children who have experienced frequent corporal punishment or spanking, they are more likely interested to engage in more risky sexual behavior. Meaning, for example, there's a study that shows that they're more likely to not use condoms during sexual encounters. Why again? Again, the whole thing of learning how to negotiate. You didn't get an opportunity to do that. And you are used to being in a coercive interaction with your parents. You expect that in your relationship. So when you get that kind of coercion from your partner, you're more likely to give in instead of standing up for yourself, because you weren't really guided on how to do that. Also, as it relates to man-woman relationships, children who are spanked or adults who were spanked studies have shown that they're more likely to engage in the kind of sexual interaction that includes a lot of violence, the spanking, the hitting, the tying up of the rope, and that kind of thing. So they find sexual pleasure through pain. And that is linked to frequent spanking as children.
And what about domestic, because we have in Jamaica, and I don't have a statistics on that, but we know because we hear that, where it seems to me as if there's something has gone critically, seriously wrong in our relationships. Hardly a week passes here in Jamaica without you hearing that there's domestic violence in a relationship, murder, suicide, or murder, or chop up, or beat up, and it seems as if people are not stopping to work through their problems anymore. They are lashing out in serious ways.
They don't know how. Now, things that you have to realize is that one of the things that should be nurtured as children is your ability for impulse control. And when you're highly stressed, so when you're being punished and all that cortisol and adrenaline is pumping in your body, you're not being taught how to regulate your impulses, which means that, you lack the capacity to anticipate consequences of your behavior. You lack the capacity to respond calmly to your environment and to stressors. So when I see a lot of violence happening, it is unfortunate, but I'm often thinking, what happened to that man as a child? Was he able to learn how to regulate his emotions? Was he able to learn how to regulate his impulses? Was he taught consequence, how to look at the different scenarios and anticipate the consequences of each of the scenarios based on his actions, whichever actions he decides to take? Was he taught how to have empathy for others? If you do not, I think sometimes as parents we are only thinking about now, and we're not thinking that our children are going to become adults. When you become adult, it doesn't mean that you automatically are going to be able to do certain things. These things have to be trained in you since you're a young child. And if you don't know how to control your emotions, and you were taught that violence and love coexist together, which should not be the case. If you love me, you hit me. You're teaching boys who will then become men that it's okay to hit another woman, or it's okay to hit another human being because that's what you do to discipline them. And we have to realize that's also coming from slavery with, what happened on the slave plantation. But you cannot expect a society that did not teach their children proper regulation skills to then have adults who can regulate their emotions and their behavior. That is why parenting is so critical. And to me, it is the most important relationship for the development of the human brain. We go wrong with that, there are so many ripple effects of it. The brain is very malleable, and obviously it will change based on the environment, so it's not as if it's very deterministic. Once something goes wrong, that's it. If you change the environment, particularly if you change the atmosphere of the parent-child relationship, you will also change the behavior of the child.
Well, I know we can't do all of this in one program, so we're just going to call this the first one and move on, because so much was said there. And you talk about empathy, and you've used that word 3 or 4 times in the conversation this morning, and the importance of a child developing empathy, and you talk about it as something that has to be taught.
Yes, it is something that has to be taught. It's not something that somebody just learns just because, a parent explained this particular thing to a child. Empathy is really understanding that others have feelings and being able to tune into the feeling of another person. So when you say, for example, you're out with your child and there's another child crying, why do you think that other child was crying? Do you think, what do you think could possibly be wrong? How do you think this person feels about, parents moving or, you know, how they feel about their grades and so on. You start to train children to see the perspective of others. And that is a way of training them to be empathetic of others. It's not telling them you need to be kind, but you have to get them to get into the world of another person. Yes, understanding their mind, but also to some extent understanding the mind of others.
So it's basically when we talk about putting yourself in somebody else's, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and walk around in it.
Right. And then also starting to understand yourself too, in disciplining your children instead of just hitting them to stop the behavior. You're supposed to ask, why did you think you made that particular choice? What made you feel that way? You know, for example, why do you think you didn't do well, or you acted out, or you were disrespectful? Again, self-understanding. You're teaching a child that, you know, understanding how their emotions work and why they make a particular decision. So once you understand self, you then have a better chance of being empathetic to others. And the other thing too is teaching children that emotions are temporary. They will fade. We all go through the ebbs and flows of life, but supporting your child when they're going through negative emotion, teaching them, okay, learning how to breathe, learning to understand that things will change. Nothing, no emotion is permanent. Some thoughts are not, you know, you're not your thoughts. Some thoughts are not valid, even though you're thinking them. Teaching children like those kind of life skills, that becomes so critical when then you enter adult relationships, especially intimate relationships with others, because then you are better equipped to navigate the ups and downs in those particular relationships. So that doesn't just develop by itself. It takes the active role of the parent nurturing that in a child.
Because are children naturally prone to be selfish?
Young children, yes, because they're all egotistical in the beginning. You know, the first 3 years of life, it's all about them. And eventually you have to nurture and let them realize that there other people have feelings as well. And the reason for that is then you go back to the brain development. So the left hemisphere deals with everything logical, language, linear. The right hemisphere deals with emotions and relationships. Now, children before the age of 3, they're very right hemisphere oriented. Everything is about their emotions. So everything is about me, 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 me. And then somewhere around age 3, they start to develop the ability to do logical thinking and understanding. It is true that it's during that time that parents then are supposed to make the effort to have them understand as they develop those logical skills that others have feelings and emotions as well. But sometimes what happens, we have, like, for example, the terrible two. Parents beat down on children when they act out during the terrible two, but and then lecturing them during that time, not realizing that the left hemisphere, the logical part of their brain, has not really started to develop as much. So they're not really understanding. So what we have to do is connect with them on an emotional level, wait until they calm down and explain why certain behavior is not appropriate and why some is. But when you expect like a 2-year-old to understand logic, their brain is not there as yet. So a lot of expectations we have as parents is unrealistic because of the developmental stage of the child.
Speak truth to the people. To identify the enemy is to free the mind. Free the mind of the people. Speak to the mind of the people. Speak truth.
All right, we're back with you inside of the Africa Forum. It is Running Africa, and my very special guest online is a mother, a certified positive discipline parent educator, cross-cultural psychology researcher, and a child development lecturer, Dr. Taniesha Burke. She's speaking to us live from Germany. We're talking about positive discipline, especially for our parents here in Jamaica. Dr. Burke, before we go quickly into what positive discipline is and to help our parents with some of these tools, you also talked about permissive. So there's punitive, permissive, and positive. So you're saying permissive is just as dangerous?
Yes, it's just as dangerous. And I know a lot of parents will say, oh, if I stop being punitive, that means you're saying I should allow my child to do whatever they want, which is permissive, it's just as dangerous. Even though children protest against boundaries, they actually appreciate it. And when you allow a child to do whatever they want without any form of consequence, you're communicating to your child that they are not as valuable and they do not matter to you. And that is where self-esteem issues can start to show up. Mm-hmm. But the thing that we have to realize as parents is that all human beings, whether it's an infant, a child, or an adult, we are all agentic, which means that there are three things that is in all human beings. We create meaning of our experiences. So we all decide, okay, this is good, this is bad. For me, we're all very strategic and very goal-oriented. And we're also very autonomous, which means we have a natural desire to protect who we are as an individual. Now, where the parenting clash is that children, because of that innate need to protect their autonomy, sometimes go against parents. And then there's a clash because the child wants to protect their autonomy and the parents want to impose their rules and regulations on the autonomy. So that is where we have to figure out how to negotiate so that, or navigate so that a parent can still instill discipline, but at the same time honor the autonomy of the child so that the child can learn and develop critical life skills that they need for the rest of their life. Mm-hmm. So yes, permissiveness is just as dangerous because you're teaching a child, you don't matter that much to me. Mm-hmm. You can do whatever you want and you will see behavioral issues coming up. So for a child who's in a structured home, a child and seeing their friend who is in a permissive home, they might think, oh wow, that's cool, you can do whatever you want and you can go wherever you want to go. But it might seem fun in the beginning, but because we have a natural need for connection and a sense of belonging, children experiencing permissiveness don't get that. And so they end up acting out, or they end up, experiencing depressive symptoms and having low self-esteem. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Just remember, children need connection and a sense of belonging.
Yeah, and you talk about low self-esteem earlier and how that manifests in terms of how, and let's just kind of quickly go back to that because we talk about low self-esteem, but how does that impact, how does that affect the child in through different phases?
So when you have low self-esteem, you go through the process that I am not good enough, I am not worthy, I'm not capable, I'm not competent. And what happens sometimes is that children just give up. I don't think I'm good enough. There's no need for me to try. Mm-hmm. And when they give up, the natural reflex of a lot of parents is to intensify their criticism, is to intensify their punishment, and the child just gives in and have this learned helplessness about them. I'm not worthy, so there's no need for me to prove to myself that I'm worthy. And when you don't feel capable and competent to achieve anything as an individual, which is a natural innate need in all of us, then you don't become the person that you are supposed to be. There's this confident person who can navigate the world with a sense of this is who I am, this is what I'm capable of doing. So it affects the academic life, then it affects the personal life. So when they become adults, they're more likely to go into relationships that are not healthy for them because they don't value themselves as much as they should have.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let us talk about solutions. And positive parenting is one way to go. Positive discipline. What is positive discipline?
So as I mentioned, when you're disciplining children, there are 5 criteria that you need to look at. So the first one is the strategy that you're using kind and firm, which means is it respectful and encouraging? 2, when you're disciplining your children, are you teaching them something, but at the same time ensuring that they have a sense of belonging and significance? So connectivity. A lot of times when we discipline from the punitive side, there's a disconnect, right? Mm-hmm. 3rd, is it effective in the long term in a positive way? When you discipline your child, if I often say to parents, picture yourself, you're at home, your child is 30 years old, they knock on your door, who is this individual that's entering your home? What kind of life skills would you want to see that person exhibit? If what you're doing now as a parent is not going to produce those life skills when they're adults at the age of 30, you need to do differently. So the fourth thing is your strategies teaching valuable life skills. So are they learning to make decisions? Are they learning to be solution-oriented? And 5, does your discipline strategies invite children to discover how capable they are and how to use their power constructively? Now, though, if whatever you're doing is not fulfilling those 5 criteria, then it's not a form of positive discipline. But I can give examples of what parents
I would want you to go there because you went through 5, and I think I'm not quite sure if parents are really writing them down. And so I want you to go back and give us an idea as to what each would look like.
Okay, so what's one of the biggest parenting strategies, the parenting challenges that Jamaicans have? Back talking, right? We often complain that our children back talk a lot. And behind what we need to realize as parents, behind every action is a meaning. Remember, where children are agentic. So every behavior that they have, there's a meaning behind it. And they're doing a particular behavior because they want to have a sense of connection. So remember, a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. A well-behaving child is an encouraged child. So when your child is misbehaving, they are discouraged for a particular reason. And you have to figure out what that is and help them through it. So let's go to the back talking. When children back talk, we as parents, we get so irritated and we get so angry and we start to threaten and we start to challenge our children that stop talking, or if you back talk one more time, you're going to get a slap or whatever, right? We're doing that because we think that if we don't, push down on our children, they're going to get away with this particular act. And what happens is that the child then becomes more defiant and they just intensify their behavior more. But what backtalking is really related to parents is that children are saying, I only belong when I'm the boss and in control, or I have to prove to you that you can't boss me around. And what that is communicating to parents is that a child is saying, you're not honoring my agency. You're not giving me opportunities to make decisions. You're pushing everything down on me without even considering my feelings. And so what the child is really saying is, give me choices. Give me an opportunity to share how I feel. So from the positive discipline stance, the first thing, for example, parents can do when they hear back talking is, you know what? I understand how you feel. Validating feelings is a way of maintaining connection. I understand how you feel, and I know I cannot force you to do anything you do not want to do. So again, you're communicating in a respectful way, and then because you're validating their experience, their feelings, you're making a connection. But then you can say, however, I need your assistance with this particular thing. It will help me to reduce my stress level today as it relates to, chores in the home. What you're then giving your child is an opportunity to participate and to be cooperative. And you can even say, okay, I can't force you to do this. You have limited choices. I'm all right. Okay, so you give choice A or B, but I'm hearing that and I'm saying, wow, I could just imagine that a Jamaican parent say, me can't force you to do it at your parent inside out. That's the thing. We have been conditioned. I think the main thing is the revelation that I got even as a parent is that we really fully don't respect our children as whole human beings. And that is hard for us to accept. The thing is, when a child, what I say to parents, when a child is encouraged, they behave better. Yes, you want to hold on to your ego and your power, but remember, when a child is encouraged, cooperation increase. They're more likely to comply. When you go through these steps and say, you have this choice, you can do this now or not, you're allowing the child to say, you give them two choices, limited choices, and they're weighing the pros and cons to see which choice they're able to work at.
Yeah.
It might seem simple to you now in that moment, but then when a child goes out into the world, whether it's a school environment or wherever, they then can even, without even thinking, start looking at the pros and cons of choices automatically.
Exactly.
But if we don't fully respect I think the challenge is we have to say, I really don't respect this person because I have way more experience. I may have way more material resources. But the only reason you have that is because you got a couple of years head start of your child. And that's hard for us to accept.
Yes. And I think it's a brilliant point you make, that when the child is encouraged, that you get a better behaving child. But the important thing, even as we listen to the points you're making this morning, to the discussion we're having this morning, is that the first thing is to hear, and the next thing is to try and put into action some of what you're hearing gradually, understanding it within the context in which this conversation was developed this morning, what the consequences are of a punitive discipline and a permissive discipline, and then to use another tool, which is positive discipline. All right, so you told us about 5, so that's one.
Yes, so you give your children limited choices, and the next thing you can do, what I say to parents, because remember what I mentioned was the brain.
Yes.
We often want to insist on punishing when emotions are high. It is futile. You're more likely to destroy the relationship because you might discipline too harsh. And remember what you're trying to impart to your child. Your child is not hearing because the upstairs brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, has just been impaired and taken over by the amygdala because they're in fight or flight mode. They're really not getting you. They're really not understanding you. So the thing to do is what can be termed as like a positive timeout. When you see the escalation going, immediately stop and say, this is not working. When we're both calm, we will have a discussion about it. And again, you're teaching your child to regulate their emotions too, to be able to pause in the middle of their emotions going wild and being able to pull back. Now, some children, when the emotions are high, they want to have like physical connection, meaning that they don't want you to go in a separate room. So it's just sitting with them until they're calm. Then you have other children who just want the physical separation and you go into your individual space. The important thing to do is that when you're calmed down, you don't go into a lecturing with your child. You have to ask your child, why were you behaving in a particular way? What were you trying to achieve? Why did you think I was being unfair to you? And I know it's uncomfortable for Jamaican parents because that's mutual respect. So if you find it hard to do, it's because you don't mutually respect your children. When you communicate like that to your child, you know what you're communicating to your child? You matter to me. Your feelings are valid and you matter to me. What will happen is that the level of resistance within the relationship start going down because your child will be learning that I can show up and say to my parents, I think this is unfair. So having the timeout is one of the best ways to do it. Also, using curiosity questions instead of telling. So Jamaicans are notorious for go brush your teeth, go to your bed now, all of that. It all ties into agency. When we feel that our autonomy is being threatened, we automatically want to protect it.
So you're not just saying go brush your teeth. What are you supposed to say? Have you brushed your teeth? No, I'm joking.
No, the thing to do is, for example, brush your teeth or say, go do your homework now. All right, if I say to you, Kabu, go do your homework now compared to, what are your plans for getting your homework done on time? Which one are you more receptive to?
All right, exactly. So the second one.
Exactly.
No.
because you don't feel threatened. Again, you can't. As human beings, we can't help it. We have evolved to protect our autonomy. We are. And so even young children, when that innate thing, that fight or flight gets triggered, they have no choice but wanting to protect their autonomy.
But at the same time, you still have to monitor, though, that the homework is done, at the end of the day.
Again, you say, so homework is a big issue. What are your plans to get your homework done? Again, sometimes as parents, we want to save our children, rescue them, and in rescuing them, they don't develop certain skills and understanding consequences. So you say to your child, what's your plan to do your homework? They're more likely going to say, it's now resting my lap, my responsibility to do my homework on time.
So what I'm getting at is then how do you draw...
not doing your homework? Get a bad grade. Let them get the bad grade.
Oh, because I was just going to say to you, so how do you draw the line between permissive, in that case, and positive parenting?
So if they don't do their homework, you let them get the bad grade and then have a discussion about it.
Okay.
How do you feel about your bad grade? What are your plans to ensure that you don't get this grade again? Again, you're giving them the responsibility. You see the life skills that you're developing with them? What are your plans to get your homework done? Do you need help from me as it relates to planning and organizing your homework? If you need my help, I'm only available at 7 p.m. I'm not going to come at 9 p.m. just before bed to do your homework. What you're teaching your children? Time management skills. What you're teaching your children? To be responsible for the tasks that they've been given. So sometimes it's fine to fail. Mistakes and failure is an opportunity to learn and grow. But in the current environment, we do not want our children to fail. And the funny thing is, resilience and self-esteem are birthed out of challenges, disappointments, and failure, and building from them.
So, Nad,
they don't just happen in thin air like that.
Dr. Burke, I'm so sorry because we want to go a little bit longer, but we're out of time. So that in terms of wrapping this segment, and I want to invite you back to the space because I know we're going to get lots of questions from parents, and we're willing to take those questions and to pass them on to you. So we want to invite you back to the space. But in terms of wrapping, what would you want parents to know who are listening this morning, who want to take on board some of what you've said? How do they begin? What would you want them to know? Where do they start?
What I want parents to first think of is, what kind of adult do you want your child to be? Like, do an inventory. What kind of characteristics, life skills do you want your child to have? Then ask yourself, what am I now doing in the present that can help my child develop that? Now, if what you're doing is not going to produce that outcome, then you have to change. And as a Jamaican culture, we are going to battle with giving mutual respect to our children. But remember, an encouraged child is a behaving child. So if you can get your child to feel encouraged, you don't have to use punitive measures with your children. And something that I've used to remind myself from time to time is that I'm raising somebody's father and I'm raising somebody's husband because I have a son. So what I'm doing now will have an impact not just on him, but his children and possibly his grandchildren. If we start looking at our relationship like that, we will become more aware of what we're doing and what we're not supposed to be doing.
Wow,
so
brilliantly
said. That I think.
Yeah. Brilliantly said. All right, well, we'll pick up from there in our next conversation, and we'll work out with you when is the next time to continue these conversations. In the meantime, how can persons reach you?
Well, the first place they can go is on my website, which is TanieshaBurke.com. And, Jamaica, Taniesha is spelled multiple ways, so it's TanieshaBurke.com. And I'm also on Facebook, which is Taniesha Burke, PhD on Facebook. There as well, on the Facebook page, I have close to 30 parenting videos giving parenting tips for different scenarios. So if you are a Jamaican parent who you're ready to make the shift because you don't like what is happening in your relationship with your child, you can go watch those videos. And if you need support, I also provide like complimentary sessions to parents so that they can ask me for different parenting advice based on their circumstance.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Taniesha Burke, talking to us now.
Before we go, on my website, there is a link that they can click to get the 10 parenting tools to increase cooperation in from their children. So that's one way they can start. That they can go through the 10 tools that are really positive discipline strategies on how they can improve cooperation in their children.
All right. Well, and that's exactly where we have to pick up next time. Thank you so much, Dr. Taniesha Burke. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Say hi to everyone. All right, Dr. Dr. Taniesha Burke.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so she's coming to us live from Berlin, Germany. And as I said earlier, she's a family friend, and we've been in each other's homes in and out over the years. And I'm really, really, really proud of the work that she's doing in positive discipline parent education. She's a mother. She's a certified positive discipline parent educator. She's based in Germany now, cross-cultural psychology researcher, child development lecturer. She received her BSc in psychology and her MSc in Applied Psychology from UWI-Mona, and then her doctoral degree in Family Relations and Human Development, the University of Guelph in Canada. And as you heard before, she has worked with youth and families in Jamaica, in Canada, in Germany. She does her courses, her workshops, mentoring and coaching program. And believe me, I'm sure that what she's done this morning is giving us food for thought. And a lot of us are going to be looking again at how we're parenting. Keep the good and see how we can incorporate some of what she said to us there. Please go to the website, check that out.